Hi friends, it's Brianna from Brianna's Bookshelf. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. I am here today to do my January reading wrap up and talk to you guys about the books that I read in January. So the first book that I read in 2025 was Spark of the Everflame by Penn. This is the first book in a fantasy romance series. It is the Kindred's Curse series. And in this book, we are following this world where there are something called descendants, and descendants are basically like the offspring of the gods. So they have all these powers and they live in this like really high society. And then there's also humans who are cast away into these human villages at the edges of the descendant societies and are basically treated really poorly and kind of live in poverty while the descendants thrive and live in these rich cities. So we're following our main character, DM, and DM is a human and she is a healer. So she works like doing medical stuff, healing people in a human town. And in the beginning of this book, her mother goes missing and she is trying to figure out what happened to her mother. And she gets called in to start doing healings for the descended in their descended part of the city. So she starts going there and helping to heal them, but she really hates the descended and she kind of like gets involved with this almost kind of like rebel group, but then she also is getting closer to specific descended as well. So there's a lot of dichotomy going on here with her kind of alliances and allegiances. And I gave this 3.5 stars. I thought it was a fun book and it was a good start to a fantasy romance series. But to be honest, it was a little bit disappointing to me compared to how much I'd heard some people hyping this series up. I certainly wasn't like completely obsessed with it. I thought that the main character, DM, made some decisions that were a little bit annoying to me at times. So just like not a fave, but I would definitely consider continuing the series because I think that there's potential for it to get better. Then I read Krampus, the Yule Lord by Brom. Now this is a book entirely about Krampus. If you don't know who that is, he's kind of this like Germanic, like Christmas spirit kind of, or Yule spirit. He is kind of scary and demonic looking, and there's a lot of different stories about him, but kind of like the essentials are that like kids are supposed to leave things out for him, and then if they don't, or if kids are bad, he will come and like take them away in a bag and beat them with a stick. It's pretty much like the stories that I've heard about him in the past. But this was super fun because it's like a reimagining of that set in like modern day where we're following this human that kind of becomes involved with Krampus in modern day. And Krampus's enemy in this book is Santa Claus. And Santa Claus is actually kind of a bad guy in this book. And Krampus, he's no saint, okay? But he is trying to restore Yule and restore, people's belief in him. And Santa Claus is just out to get him. So Krampus is trying to build his following and he enlists the help of our main character in that. And like Brom's other books, this had illustrations at the beginning of each chapter and like some fun illustrations in the middle too. So I really like this. I actually gave this 4 stars. I started reading this around Christmas time, which was the perfect time to read it because it was definitely giving me those seasonal vibes, but from a very different perspective. And one of the themes of this book was kind of being against the consumerism that we have in this modern day with Christmas. So being against like buying all these things and, having all this useless plastic decor that we really don't need. Krampus was trying to get people to go back to, Yule, which is a different holiday than Christmas, but I totally agreed with some of the things he was saying, like to use like natural decorations and like just kind of bring back like the meaning of the season of like just being together and it's not just all about consumption. So I love that. Love you, Krampus. I read Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I've really been wanting to read this since I read one of Paul Tremblay's other books last year and absolutely loved it. And this one I loved as well. I gave it 4 stars, so not an all-time fave, but definitely a love. And this is such an interesting premise for a horror book. I definitely think it's really unique to other books that I've read. And in this book, we are starting off following this young girl named Wen, and she is on a like lakeside vacation and at a cabin with her two fathers. And essentially, as we're starting out with this book, she is playing outside and she gets approached by this random man that she doesn't know. And keep in mind, they're in this very isolated cabin that's like miles away from anything else. This man walks up the road and starts talking to her and trying to be her friend, and like reassures her that he's okay to talk to, even though she's kind of worried about stranger danger. And then from there, she goes back inside and tells her fathers what has happened with this man, and more people start coming. So other people join this man, and they all have these like horrifying looking weapons, and they start to knock on the door and say, "You need to let us inside the house. And if you don't let us inside the house, basically the world is going to end." And from there, it just continues to get more horrifying, more gruesome, and very strange. And honestly, this is such like a different book. It's hard to describe like what is even going on without giving it away. But it's basically, the essential question is like, how far would you go, or what would you do to protect other people? And what would you do to save the world? Would you be willing to sacrifice things that you love? And yeah, it was honestly just like a very terrifying book, but in the best way. Like, it had so much good reflection to it. And also we really got to explore kind of this cult group, which I thought was very interesting and also very relevant, because I feel like there's a lot of like cultism going on these days, people who are just like blindly following leaders without questioning things, and that was definitely what was going on with this group here. So super interesting. I would highly recommend this. Okay, then I read a little short story. I read White Nights. Okay, I think his name is Dostoevsky. Please excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. But this is a famous author. He wrote Crime and Punishment, I believe, and some other really famous books. And I've always wanted to read something by him just because I know he has such a big impact on modern literature. And so I decided I would ease into this with a short story. And I had heard that White Nights was really recommended by a lot of people online. I thought this was okay. I gave it 3 stars, and honestly, the plot was really not very interesting to me. But what did get me was the writing. I thought the writing was really good, and there were some parts that were just like really lyrical and just so interesting. We're following this main character, this young man in Russia who basically is very socially isolated. He doesn't have any friends or lovers, and he meets this girl who he starts talking to and basically like opening up to her about his life and how he like yearns for human connection. And a lot of, just the things that he's thinking about and saying were very poetic, but there's not a lot of plot. It's just like the two of them talking for like 2 days, basically. And he's kind of giving cringe. Like, if this man was in modern day coming up and trying to tell me all his thoughts and feelings, I'd be like, "Sir, we don't know each other. Like, I'm glad that you are introspective, but you're just doing way too much, okay?" Thought it was interesting. I'm glad I read it, but not a love. Then on my Kindle, I read Reign of Shadows and Endings by Melissa K. Roehrich, and I liked this book so much that I ordered the physical copy for myself for my birthday, and I also got the next 2 books in the series. And this is the first book in a fantasy romance series. This is the Legacy series. I gave this one 4.5 stars, so definitely a very strong start to the series. And I do think that it has potential to go up from there and be like a favorite series. I've just heard so many good things about it as well, the series as a whole. In this first book, we are following Tessa and Theon. Now, in this world, we have something called legacies, which are kind of like almost like descendants of the gods, so they have these really strong powers. And then we also have Fae as well as humans. The Fae are kind of like under the legacy, and in this society, the Fae are kind of like servants of the legacy, and they, in some instances, can help strengthen their powers. So the male main character, Theon, he is the heir of like one of the kingdom's royal families, and because of that, he gets to choose what is called a source and make a source bond. So the source will be a fae who he is able to draw power from and basically use as a power well. And he chooses our female main character, Tessa, to be his source. Now, for some fae, this would be an honor. Some of them have been training for this their whole lives. However, Tessa absolutely wants nothing to do with this. Okay, this is the last thing she wants. She is shocked to her core when she gets chosen. She wants nothing to do with Theon, okay? Now, please note, this is a very dark book, okay? So please look up trigger warnings. This source bond kind of makes them have feelings that they don't know whether those are from the source bond or their own feelings. And Tessa just like wants out of this, but Theon won't let her out of it. And she pretty much hates him, but they also kind of keep getting drawn back to one another. And man, this is just so dramatic. And it's a pretty long book. And a lot of it is just like their interactions and how their relationship is building and changing. But it really hooked me. And I cannot wait to see where the series goes from here. So I would definitely recommend trying this if any of that sounds interesting to you and if you're okay with a bit of a darker romance. Then for my Dark Academia reading vlog, I finished reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And this is a book that I have been reading since this past fall. It's taken me quite a while. It's a very thick book with a lot of dense writing and like this kind of historical prose. So I just wanted to really take my time with this. And I'm so glad that I did because I really liked it. I gave this 4 stars. And I definitely think if I tried to rush through it, it would have negatively impacted my experience with reading this book. So I think Susanna Clarke just writes beautifully. Again, this is very lyrical writing. There is this historic style, so it's a little bit hard to get through. But essentially, we're following these magicians in 1800s England. When we start this book, we are meeting Mr. Norrell, who is, at that time, the only magician in England who actively practices magic, so the only one who actually casts spells. And Mr. Norrell is just such an interesting person. Like, he definitely has a very high view of himself. He's very particular. Honestly, just like so many of the things he said, like, made me laugh out loud while I was reading this book. He was quite the character. And then eventually we come to meet Jonathan Strange, who becomes another practicing magician, and the two start to work together. So we're just following kind of this journey of the two of them and gradually how like they come together and then come apart. So it's just a lot of interpersonal drama as well as magic, and we're going through some historical events as well. So I'd highly recommend this, especially as like a wintertime read. If you're in the mood for something that's a bit slower but has more of like that fairy tale kind of feel, I think that this would be one to pick up. Then also for my Dark Academia vlog, I read Gothikana by RuNyx on my Kindle on Kindle Unlimited. This I was not such a big fan of. Okay, I gave it 2 stars and it wasn't like terrible, but it wasn't good in my opinion. Okay, so don't come for me. It's totally fine if you like this, but for me, the writing was just not for me. I didn't feel engaged. I felt like there was, to be honest, way too much going on with the plot where it felt kind of unbelievable, even though it was already like a paranormal story. So obviously parts of it are going to be outside of what is reality. But even in this world that was created, things like didn't add up for me. That's just how I felt. And we are following this girl who gets accepted to this mysterious university that's like in a castle on a hill. And when she gets there, she starts this kind of dark romance with a professor there. And there's also like murders that have gone on in this school, and there's like ghosts, and there's this whole mental health aspect that I feel like is kind of poorly addressed, to be honest. That, again, that's just my opinion. But so I think the writing overall, not for me. Plot, not for me. The main character, she had some redeeming qualities, and some of the spicy scenes were fun, but again, some of them were kind of weird. But it did keep me flipping the pages. Like, I definitely felt like I wanted to know what happened. I also read in January If We Were Villains by ML Rio. Now, this has been on my TBR like forever, so I'm so glad that I got to this. And this is like one of the most perfect Dark Academia books in my opinion. And I did give this 5 stars. In this book, we're following a group of theater students who go to this arts college, and they specifically study Shakespeare. And these kids are like so hooked on Shakespeare. They are talking to each other in Shakespeare quotes constantly. They're constantly like doing different plays. And there's this, like, we're following the tensions basically in this friend group and the different roles that they play on stage, as well as kind of the roles they play within this group off stage. And there's definitely heightening tensions throughout the book as there's different romances and feuds and people like not getting the roles they want. And yeah, just increasing drama until like a tragic event happens within this friend group. I won't say more than that, but from there we're trying to figure out like what really happened, and it's just really good. Okay, and the plot does remind me a little bit of The Secret History, which is also a 5-star book for me. So I would say I love both. The Secret History to me is still like the number one, but this comes as a close second in terms of dark academia. I really love this and would really recommend it, especially if you've tried to read The Secret History and felt like it was too long for you or that it was very meandering. This book is a little bit more to the point, so definitely try this out. The last book that I read for my dark academia reading vlog was An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson, and I gave this book 4 stars, so again, one that I really enjoyed. I thought this book has such an interesting plot and such an interesting mix of genres. So this is a dark academia fantasy book, but it does have a little bit of a sprinkling of horror in it, so there are some kind of spookier elements within it as well. And we are following our main character, Lennon, and at the start of the book, Lennon's life is basically falling apart, but she gets this mysterious call telling her that she has been accepted to a university that she never even applied for. But due to the circumstances of her life that in that current time, she decides to actually pursue this and find out what it's about. And she ends up at Drayton College, which is this college where they're teaching students the art of persuasion. And what this means is that these students are learning how to control other people's actions, influence other people, and some of them are even able to control and influence matter. So for example, like making objects move, like a telekinesis kind of vibe, or some of them can like open up portals to different worlds. So super interesting magic going on in this book. And also our characters are really interesting as well. So as soon as Lennon gets to this college in her entrance exam, she meets this professor named Dante, and he ends up becoming her advisor. And Dante is like this very powerful persuasionist, but he has a lot of secrets, and we're kind of like trying to figure out if he's a good person or if he's actually a bad person. And I always love that in a book. I love like when you cannot tell if someone's good or bad, or if there's like, you feel like you can't even determine that. There's like such a mix of good and evil actions by this person. I just think it's fascinating. And so yeah, we're following Lennon as she's at school and she's learning things. And then the stakes kind of increase as Dante reveals to her more and more of like what he's trying to do with these skills. And we end up finding out that the school as a whole has more of a plan for Lennon than she thought. And yeah, I won't say any more than that because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's super interesting. A lot of fun characters, a really fun and interesting world and magic system. I definitely recommend it. And last in January, I read Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig, I believe is the author. Now this is book 2 in the Shepherd King duology. So the first book was One Dark Window, which I did read last year on my Kindle, and then I figured why not finish it up, even though I wasn't like super taken with One Dark Window, but I did want to continue and finish it just since it was a duology, very short. And I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. It wasn't anything like fabulous, but I definitely did enjoy reading it. And I won't go too much into the plot of Two Twisted Crowns since it is a sequel, but the first book, One Dark Window, is kind of this gothic fantasy romance where we're following a world where there's these cards. They're not quite like tarot cards. It's basically these cards where there's different ones that have different abilities that you could get from them, and if you are in possession of one of these cards and you activate it, you gain this ability. So these cards are obviously very valuable in this world, and we're following this kingdom where that basically revolves around these cards. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a very interesting premise. And I enjoyed some of the characters. I thought it was very unique, so I'll give it that, but I never got that sucked into it, to be honest. So that's why I'm giving it 3 stars. I felt interested, compelled, but I was never feeling like I have to finish this. I felt like if I needed to, I could put the book down and probably forget about it. So 3 stars it is. So those were the 10 books that I read in January. I'm super excited for February as a reading month because I'm definitely going to try to get into some more romance and some romantasy. There is a romantasy readathon going on in February that I think I might be joining, so stay tuned if I end up doing a vlog for that. And thank you all so much for being here and listening to my opinions on these books. I would love to hear down below if you have read any. I would love to hear what you have to say, or if you have any recommendations for me based on which books I liked from this list. I would love to hear that as well. So thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you later. Bye!